anybody who kind of can look around right now can kind of see how screwed up things are. And when you say that, everybody immediately agrees with you, and half of the people who agree with you are agreeing with you, and the other half are actually on the complete opposite side of what you just said. Not to bury the lead here and, drone on too long before I get to the point, I'm going to talk about John Gruden and how he got run out of the NFL here just over the course of the last couple weeks. Obviously, this email scandal and everything like that, and there's a significant part of this that to me is really messed up that nobody's talking about. I guess I'll just go down the list and I'll just kind of like lay it out piece by piece. The first thing is that he's being condemned, has been condemned. I mean, he's out of the league. He's probably never going to coach in the NFL ever again. I don't know that he's ever going to be in the public eye ever again after this. But I just want to go down the layers here of exactly what happened here and the fact that this whole thing is ridiculous. The fact that he doesn't have a job anymore in the NFL is ridiculous. And the reason why it is because once you distill this whole thing down and to what actually happened and what it is he's actually essentially guilty of, I challenge you to call it anything other than thought crime. Because, Gruden was, emails of his were unearthed and then they were leaked to the public through, I guess, the New York Times. And then those emails have not really, they haven't really been disseminated to the public. Like, as far as I tried to find them to see what he actually said. I'm so sick and tired of media types telling me, the most deplorable things were said in these emails. And it's like, well, can I see what's in the emails so I can decide for myself exactly what level of deplorable I think it is? So I'm having to do this having not seen what's actually in the emails based on just what people are saying. And so I want to start at the beginning of this, really. And the beginning is that Gruden was not under any investigation. Gruden's behavior had not been called into question by anybody. And John Gruden was not at any point an employee of the Washington Redskins or the Washington football team at any point. So essentially the Washington Redskins / Washington football team is under, they're currently, in the midst of a kind of an NFL scandal thing where they had a lot of sexual harassment going on in their facility and a bunch of inappropriate behavior. The NFL is doing an investigation, and Bruce Allen, who's essentially the head cheese beyond, not counting the owner himself, the head of, all football operations, Bruce Allen. They are, of course, they're going through his emails because they want to see, they're probably looking for some kind of confirmation if, people who've said, I went to Bruce Allen, I told him this sexual harassment was going on and he didn't do anything about it. So that's the kind of stuff they're looking for. They're trying to, they're confirming whether or not Bruce Allen, how much knowledge he had of what was going on. I haven't been really following it very closely, so I don't know the specifics of who the targets are of the investigation, but I know that John Gruden is not one of them because he never worked there, and he didn't spend, as far as I know, any time there. John Gruden's relationship to Bruce Allen in this situation was simply as a friend, and maybe he was like kind of an unofficial consultant or anything like that, or something like that, but to my knowledge, he was receiving no paycheck, he was receiving no gratuity, no nothing from the Washington Redskins. So any interaction that he had with Bruce Allen was purely social. It was as a private citizen. Gruden at the time that he made these comments was not an employee of any of the NFL or any of its affiliates. He wasn't an employee of the Raiders. He wasn't an employee of the Redskins. He wasn't an employee of the NFL. He did not work for any of these companies at the time. And these emails were entirely 100% private. It was as private as if you were to email a friend or a brother or a sister or something like that, or whatever, but just an email between you and another person, that it's really nobody's business. It's really a private conversation, as private as if you were in your own home having a conversation. Now, in this situation, Bruce Allen, who is the target of this investigation, or he is part of one of the targets of the NFL's investigation, all this sexual harassment stuff going on over at the Washington football team's facility and their organization and their all that. Bruce Allen doesn't have necessarily, as the target of the investigation, he obviously has their suspicion on him as far as his, at the very least, complicity in all of this, and so him being a target, his emails being uncovered, and anything that is negative to him, going public is one thing. But the thing is that Gruden was not a target of the investigation. He didn't have anything to do with this sexual harassment that was going on over at the Washington football team facility. So his emails, or his participation in the emails, in my opinion, is a private matter. The fact that he was communicating with Bruce Allen, this would be no different than if Bruce Allen was communicating with his wife. That would be nobody's business. And this is nobody's business. Like, what a private conversation between John Gruden and Bruce Allen is no one's business. And it's really not. I mean, the Bruce Allen part of it is, from the standpoint of the NFL's investigation, if they want to create, oh, this is a pattern of behavior or what have you. But the thing is that Gruden has no behavior. He's not under investigation by the Raiders. He wasn't under investigation by the NFL. There was nobody who had made any accusations against him as far as him being, having said inappropriate behavior or having said inappropriate things, or having committed any inappropriate acts or anything like that. There's no sexual harassment claim against him. And so this is really just something that the NFL stumbled upon. And then, rather than keeping it private, which in my opinion they had a responsibility to do, they decided to go ahead and make it public. And now they're saying that they didn't leak this, but that's bullshit, because they're the only ones who had it. Now, a lot of people are probably going to be like, oh yeah, why are you defending John Gruden? Are you a big Raiders fan? Are you a big John Gruden fan? I'm not a big Raiders fan. I really am not. I mean, when I was a kid, I was a Broncos fan, and I hated the Raiders. And I still don't like the Raiders, and I've never liked Al Davis. And I'm not rooting for the Raiders to be successful. I always have thought that John Gruden was an excellent coach. And the idea that he's going to get drummed out of the league for what is essentially his private thoughts, or thoughts that he shared with a friend via private emails, the amount of virtue signaling and the amount of, just the whinging and the fainting couches having to get rolled in because people are so offended by these things that John Gruden said in a private email, I just find to be disgusting. Not the emails, but people's reaction to these things, especially within the NFL. Like, what is actually in the emails is hard to discern, because I went ahead and I did an internet search. I could not find specifics on all of the emails. There are a couple of specific things that have been laid out. One of them was that he said Maurice Smith, the president of the NFL Players Association, and he is a black guy. Apparently Gruden said that he had lips that were as big as Michelin tires. And then another specific thing that he said was something about Michael Sam, first openly gay player who was drafted while the NFL knew that he was openly gay, and he got drafted by the Rams, I guess. I want to say the Rams 4 years ago, something like that. Anyway, he got drafted in like the 4th, 5th round, something like that. And apparently Gruden had said that, had made in the private emails to Bruce Allen, he had mentioned something about how it was messed up that Goodell, commissioner of the NFL, had pressured Fisher into drafting Michael Sam as high as he did because he was a gay player and it would be a good PR moment for the NFL. And anyway, that was one of the specific things. Apparently Gruden said something about how it was silly that they had female referees, and then other than that, so those are the kind of like the specific things that I've been able to dig up, and then beyond that it's kind of vagaries, and the vagaries are that he used misogynistic language, and that he used homophobic language, and that this is a direct quote, he had the wrong opinion about the kneelers. That's exactly how it was said. He had the wrong opinion about, not that he had a controversial opinion about the kneelers, he had the wrong opinion about the kneelers, okay, which that language, for me particularly, I find that just offensive that anybody would talk that way. That makes me want to slap somebody in the face when they talk that way, because it's like, it's not the wrong opinion, it's just not your opinion. And, he has the right to his own opinion, certainly in his own head, and certainly within private emails to somebody that he knows. Again, I want to reiterate that John Gruden did nothing. He is not under investigation, and he was not under suspicion, and people are surprised that he would say these things in emails, which means that no one had any reason to suspect that he was a racist, that he was a misogynist, Not that he even is these things, by the way. You know, when they say he used misogynistic language. Now, I played football, so I've been around a lot of football coaches. And then I've seen a lot of, I've seen behind the scenes stuff with, various football coaches and collegiate, video documentaries, what have you, of football coaches in college, pro football coaches, all this kind of stuff. So I've seen a lot of tape on coaches, and I was around a lot of coaches, in high school and junior high and stuff like that. And the idea that somebody would use, misogynistic language, bear in mind that what they're talking about is pussy, probably. They're probably talking about some coach, or in this case, Gruden, calling a player a pussy, saying that player is a pussy, or something like to that nature. He's a pussy. Don't be a pussy. They're playing like a bunch of pussies. Like, he probably used that context. That's probably the context of his, quote, misogynistic language. And if I was going to guess about the number of coaches that have used misogynistic language, with air quotes around it, the misogynistic language of calling their players pussies or other players pussies, or challenging them not to be pussies or whatever. If I were to guess the percentage of football coaches that I have interacted with, witnessed, that I'm aware have existed, the number of coaches that have used that language, and recently, versus the ones that haven't, the percentage of coaches that have used that language is probably somewhere at or near 100%. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find a coach who had not referred to his players or some player or challenged them not to be, pussies, essentially. So the misogynistic thing, I think, is kind of ridiculous. The homophobic language. So again, football coach, homophobic language. Faggot. Like, the idea that in private conversation, John Gruden would refer to a player that way. Like, oh, that guy, he's a fag, he's a faggot, or whatever. The idea that John Gruden would use that language to describe a player, him being a head coach in the NFL, who is 50, 60 years old, whatever he is now. I think he's got to be close to 60, probably 55 at least. He's got to be in that age range. 60, somewhere around there, late 50s, something like that. There is no coach in the NFL who probably doesn't use that language. Again, I want to keep hammering this home. It's not that Gruden got caught using this language on the job, on the practice field, on the field. And let's be clear, John Gruden is somebody who has been coaching in the NFL since the mid-90s. He was the quarterbacks coach of the Green Bay Packers. From there, he went on and got the head coaching job with the Raiders. From there, he went on to coach for the Buccaneers, and then he was in television, and then he went to the Raiders. And he has been in the NFL. People have microphones on him all the time, on the sideline, during the games, at practices, in the locker room, giving these passionate, emotional speeches. Every opportunity in the world to be caught in a negative, candid moment where, he says something, where he's angry, or he's so happy he says something, or says something inappropriate in a way where, because he just forgets where he is or whatever. Like, so the idea that he's never used this kind of language publicly, he's never used it, or never had any complaints of it. Never had, not in 30 years of coaching, or however long he's been coaching, 20 years. You're talking about a guy who's been in the league 20 years, and you're telling me that there's never been a formal complaint against him for using any racial slurs or misogynistic slurs or homophobic slurs, or there's never been anybody who outside the NFL, got a recording of him saying something during a practice, during the heated moment of a football game. There's never been a moment where he said something and it never went public, and he never, you know what I mean? Like, and all of a sudden now he has these things that he said in these emails, and I'm not denying that he said them in the emails, And he's not denying, as far as I can tell, as far as I know, that he has said it in the emails. But again, the context, private emails, private conversation, exposed to the world. And I want, not that there's going to be people who agree with me, and then there's going to be people who disagree with me. And the people who disagree with me are always going to disagree with me. And I, quite frankly, they're going to disagree with me about this, but they're not going to disagree with me if it happens to somebody that they support, because their principles are inconsistent and they're not thinking what this means in the grand scheme of things. Like, what happens next? This is, you are essentially running this guy out of the NFL. You're running Gruden out of the NFL for thought crime. He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything to anybody. He just had these thoughts and put them in an email and sent it to one individual. Private conversation. He's probably had private conversations with other people where he's talked like this, because they're people who he just feels comfortable around, and he just, again, talks this way in that context, just those private conversations. And the fact that he's never been called out or caught. And I'm sure someone's going to bring up Keyshawn Johnson, but I think the utilization of Keyshawn Johnson as an eyewitness in this situation, for those of you who don't know, Keyshawn Johnson was a wide receiver. He played for Gruden for a couple years in Tampa Bay. They had some sort of a falling out, and Keyshawn Johnson has always maintained that John Gruden's the biggest piece of shit that he's ever known, or something to that degree. But every single person in the NFL has a negative opinion of Keyshawn Johnson, because Keyshawn Johnson has always been perceived as a selfish and very egotistical player, and nobody really gave Keyshawn the time of day, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to hold him up as like some sort of a prophet. And I find it disingenuous that you would all of a sudden care about or appreciate the integrity of one Keyshawn Johnson when you didn't care about his opinion a month ago. Now all of a sudden it matters because it validates your narrative about how John Gruden is this big piece of shit, and that makes you happy. But you're going to run John Gruden out of the league for thought crime. And he didn't do anything to warrant this. This would be different if he had said something at work, or if someone else had said something and they said, somebody said, a racist thing inside the Raiders facility, and John Gruden was standing right there and he was laughing about it. And I just felt like I couldn't, when he was there and he was laughing about it, I didn't feel like I could come forward and, complain about it to anybody. And I felt trapped, and it felt like a hostile work environment. So if Gruden was under investigation for one of those things, then you could argue that these emails are relevant to that. But these emails were unearthed because of an investigation of somebody that Gruden is associated with, but again, was not the employee of the Raiders or the Washington Redskins at the time. I guess this is kind of the wrong term, because this is a legal term, but there's no probable cause for anyone to have been investigating John Gruden, and no one was investigating John Gruden, so you essentially uncovered this information as part of another investigation. Now, this happens all the time in legal circles, and if John Gruden had actually broken the law, then you might have a point, but he didn't break the law, and so essentially you just are putting him on trial, in the court of public opinion, because he has unfavorable opinions or said things that people find offensive. And since he didn't break any law, and since his behavior did not precipitate any investigation into his activities or his attitudes or anything like that, this is literally just something you stumbled upon. To me, the self-righteousness of people who want John Gruden gone because he had private thoughts that you find unfavorable is disgusting to me, and it's hypocritical, because every single person out there has a private conversation, or many, or an email, or many, or an instant message, or many, that if it was exposed to the world, you would be shown in a very unfavorable light. We're talking about somebody who, and I'm gonna keep hammering this home, that he did nothing to precipitate the investigation, the exposure of these emails. So his public behavior was absolutely, totally acceptable by everyone involved. And it's important to think about this, because you have a player in the NFL, the quarterback of the Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson, who's currently under criminal investigation for 20 different women over several states who have filed criminal complaints, and he is currently under criminal investigation, Deshaun Watson is, for actual sexual assault and sexual harassment of these masseuses, these female masseuses. And apparently what Deshaun Watson does is he gets these massages by these sports massage therapists, and then he tries to like have sex with them or something. So that's an ongoing thing. And in the past, the NFL would have canned a player or suspended a player over something like this. And yet, as of right now, nothing has been done. The NFL has just pretended that this thing doesn't even exist. They haven't acknowledged it at all. Deshaun Watson hasn't been suspended. He hasn't been fined. You know, there's been absolutely nothing mentioned about this. And so I want you to take in your hands a scale, and I want you to put on one of the dishes on the scale, I want you to put sexual harassment, actual sexual harassment with actual human victims, you know, who have actually filed criminal charges against Deshaun Watson. And then in the other dish, on the other side of the scale, John Gruden had unpopular opinions that he shared privately that no one should have ever been aware even existed, because it's none of your fucking business. How much more of this? How much longer are we going to continue to condemn people for having bad opinions while we let people who actually have harmful behavior, physical harmful behavior, where they affect other people physically, not just say mean things? Okay? Because between these two, if one of them should have been run out of the league before the other, I personally think that Deshaun Watson deserves his day in court just like anybody else. But between these two and what they are, quote, guilty of, one isn't really guilty of anything. He just has opinions that you don't like. But he wasn't even making those public. I mean, if he had made them public, then you would have an argument maybe. But he had these opinions privately in private emails that only were exposed because somebody he was talking to, they behaved badly. So he's essentially been dragged into this because of this other investigation, and because he essentially has thoughts that are unpopular and or controversial. Because he has these opinions, again, he kept these opinions to himself. He did not publicly dress down the NFL about the Michael Sam thing. He didn't publicly, I don't recall him ever coming out publicly for or against the kneeling thing. I think he's pretty much towed the line for what the NFL wants from their representatives. And so from that standpoint, you know, so now you're saying like, okay, it's not enough. It's not enough that he's behaving the way that we're telling him to behave. He isn't even allowed to like blow off steam in a private email to somebody. If that comes out, you're gone. And yet Deshaun Watson's behavior is, you know, totally okay. And there's been other stuff too. I mean, I could go ahead and I could dig up stuff in the NFL where people have suffered less for way more than what John Gruden has done. So, I don't know. I could talk about this for hours. The hypocrisy of everyone with their weak ass virtue signaling and their just faux outrage over this stuff, or even if it's real outrage, it's just that just makes it all the more pathetic. And you're not thinking ahead. You're not thinking about where this leads. Like the idea that you are not allowed to have private opinions, it's not enough. Again, not only can you not voice those, you can't voice those private opinions, or you can't voice those opinions. You can't voice those opinions at work. If you voice those opinions on social media, other people will find them and they will chase you to work and they will post them and say, hey, you person you work for put this stuff up on Facebook, you should fire them. That's not enough. Now you're taking a private email. So you're not allowed to send private emails or private instant messages to anybody and voice any opinions about anything. And by the way, this isn't the first time this happened. This happened in the NBA with Ronald Silver, whatever his name was, the former owner of the LA Clippers, when he had a private conversation with his concubine, and she recorded the conversation, and it was promoted that he had, had gone on some racist diatribe during this recorded conversation, illegally recorded, by the way. And if you actually listen to the video, he doesn't even at any point say anything racist. And so in his case, it was even, in the Silver case in the NBA was even worse than this. And nobody stood up and defended Silver. More importantly, it's not about defending Silver. It's not about defending Gruden. It's about defending the principle that a person should have a measure of that their private emails should be private. And Gruden's name should have been redacted. The NFL should never have been allowed. The NFL leaked this. They're saying they didn't. They absolutely did. I don't believe for a second that they didn't leak this. And quite frankly, I hope that Gruden attacks the NFL legally for defamation, because I would think he would have a case, and maybe some lawyer can correct me, but I would think he has a case, because he did not make those emails public, and there's no justification for those emails being made public. And I don't see how that would be any worse than doxing somebody or doing something of that nature. I continue to be disgusted by the NFL. This is why I don't watch the NFL anymore. And I love football. I've always loved football, and I love pro football, but I can't financially support a league that is going to behave this way. And I just can't believe that nobody has, like, it's not even about having the courage to, again, it's not about supporting Gruden. It's not about agreeing with the things that he said. It's about the principle that you don't have the right to your own private thoughts anymore. You're not allowed to share your own private thoughts. You're not even allowed to share your thoughts with a friend in private emails anymore. Like, that's now in bounds. Doesn't matter how it gets acquired. Doesn't matter how it comes to light. Somebody can go ahead and hack your emails and then just publicly, like, splash them all over the internet. And if you say anything negative in any of those emails, then it's just fair game. So now you're making it impossible to be a flawed human being. We have embraced whole hog the concept of people being punished for thought crime. And everybody seems to be just okay with it.